I want you to picture a scenario. It's a little painful, but bear with me. You decide to renovate your house. You hire a contractor who stands in your living room, looks you dead in the eye, and promises you the world.
Oh, I think I know where this is going.
He says, we'll come in under budget, we'll finish ahead of schedule, and the materials will be top tier. You shake hands, you feel great. 11 months later, you walk through the front door, the roof is missing, the cost has doubled. And this is the absolute kicker. He's charging you extra fees for the blueprints he already showed you a year ago.
That is a nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
I think my blood pressure just went up listening to it.
Right. It's the classic bait and switch. But today, we aren't talking about drywall or plumbing. We are talking about a case of financial whiplash that is currently hitting an entire province. We are diving into a stack of sources, primarily a critical analysis titled The Budget That Broke the Promise, which dissects the British Columbia government's fiscal shift between February 2025 and February 2026.
And whiplash really is the only word for it. Usually, government budgets move like ocean liners. They turn slowly. This was a speedboat doing a U-turn at full throttle.
Exactly. Our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how a government goes from projecting declining deficits and a strict no new taxes pledge to record-breaking debt and a $4.4 billion tax hike, all in less than 12 months.
It's startling. And to really understand the gravity of this, we have to look at the two different realities presented to the public. Reality A is the 2025 budget projections released right before an election. That was the sales pitch.
Okay.
Reality B is the 2026 budget delivered yesterday, February 17, 2026. That is the bill coming due.
And the question on everyone's mind, and certainly the question driving the analysis in our source material, is simple. Was Reality A a mistake? Did they just get the math wrong? Or was it a calculated move to hide the bad news until after the votes were counted?
That's the core tension. Is this incompetence or is it deception?
Let's start with the numbers, because the gap between what we were told and what we're seeing is massive. The analysts are calling this the deficit disconnect. Just how big of a miss are we talking about here?
It's the difference between a manageable mortgage and a foreclosure notice.
Yeah.
Back in 2025, the government laid out what they called a path to balance.
Right.
They projected a deficit of about $10.2 billion. Now, $10 billion is still a lot of red ink, but the key narrative, the story they sold, was the trajectory. It was supposed to be declining. They explicitly told voters they were taking first steps to balancing.
Right. The message was, we have a plan, stick with us, we're turning the corner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fast forward 11 months to yesterday, the actual deficit for the 2026-27 fiscal year isn't $10 billion. It has hit a record high of $13.3 billion.
$13.3 billion. That's a massive jump in less than a year. How does the government even explain a miss that big? They can't just shrug that off.
Well, naturally, they have a reason. They're blaming tariffs. The narrative they are pushing is that, global trade winds have shifted, blowing a hole in the budget.
Okay, playing devil's advocate here, tariffs are real. Global trade is volatile. Is that a legitimate excuse, or is it just a convenient scapegoat?
It would be plausible, if not for one nagging detail highlighted in our source material. The analysis points out that TD Economics, one of the major banks, warned back in 2025 that the government's fiscal plan didn't account for tariffs at all.
Wait, so the risk was there, the experts warned them about it, they chose not to include it in the math, and now they're acting surprised that it happened.
Precisely. That's why the surprise rings so hollow. The sources argue that the structural gap, the hole in the budget, existed before the tariffs hit. The tariffs just made it wider. They didn't create it.
Wow.
And now that pre-election optimism is completely gone. RBC Economics looked at these new numbers and stated bluntly, there is no path to balance.
That's a chilling phrase. No path to balance. It implies we're just drifting deeper into the red with no map to get out.
And when you're drifting without a map, usually the first thing you do is stop spending money on the nice-to-haves. Or in this case, unfortunately, the need-to-haves. Which brings us to the capital plan.
This part of the analysis really stuck out to me because we move away from abstract billions and start talking about actual buildings. The 2025 budget promised a massive capital plan, $45.9 billion over 3 years. What does the 2026 budget say?
It says we can't afford that anymore. The plan has been slashed to $37.7 billion. That is an $8.2 billion cut.
$8 billion? That's not trimming the fat. That's an amputation. What specifically is getting cut? Because usually these cuts happen in vague, bureaucratic corners.
Not this time. It's the projects that arguably matter most to vulnerable populations. The 2025 budget promised $2.3 billion specifically for long-term care facilities. We're talking about beds for seniors.
And we know there's a waiting list for those. I have friends whose parents are stuck in hospitals because there are no care beds available.
A massive waiting list. And the government wasn't vague about this in 2025. They listed the locations to get people excited. Vancouver, Colwood, Abbotsford, Richmond, Nanaimo, Delta, Campbell River, Kelowna, Squamish, Chilliwack, Cranbrook.
That covers a huge chunk of the province. That's thousands of families who thought help was finally on the way.
It does. And according to the analysis of the 2026 budget, 7 of those previously approved projects are now paused indefinitely.
Paused indefinitely. We all know what that means in government speak.
It usually means goodbye, or at least don't hold your breath. And it's not just senior care.
Yeah.
Phase 2 of Burnaby Hospital has been shelved. Student housing at UVic, the University of Victoria, has been canceled.
That's devastating for students. Imagine accepting an offer to UVic thinking, okay, housing is tight, but they're building new dorms, only to find out the funding was just pulled.
That's the aha moment our sources are driving at. You don't announce $2 billion in construction and then cancel it 11 months later just because market conditions changed. The suggestion here is that the funding was never actually there to begin with.
A phantom promise.
That's the argument.
That feels like a betrayal. I mean, people made life plans based on that. So on one hand, services and infrastructure are vanishing, but usually if you cut services, you save money. Or if you need more money, you raise taxes. It feels like we're getting hit on both sides here.
We are, and that brings us to the tax pivot. This is likely the most controversial part of the budget. Do you remember the slogan from the 2025 budget regarding taxes?
Vividly, no new taxes. It was the headline. It was on every pamphlet.
Well, that promise has been shattered.
Yeah.
The 2026 budget introduces $4.4 billion in new tax measures.
$4.4 billion. That is a staggering amount of money to pull out of the economy. Who is paying this? Is it just the ultra-wealthy?
Far from it. Everyone is paying this. Let's start with income tax. For the first time since the year 2000, the bottom income tax bracket has been raised. It went from 5.06% to 5.6%.
So the lowest earners in the province are seeing their rate go up.
Correct. But there's a sneakier tax in here. The analysis calls it a stealth tax, but technically it's known as freezing bracket indexation.
Okay, stop right there. Bracket indexation. That sounds like the kind of jargon designed to make my eyes glaze over so I don't notice I'm losing money. Break that down for us. What does it actually mean for a listener driving to work right now?
Think of it this way. Normally, tax brackets are adjusted for inflation. If the cost of living goes up by, say, 3%, the government moves the tax brackets up by 3%.
Okay.
That way, if you get a cost of living raise just to keep up with the price of milk and gas, the government doesn't punish you by pushing you into a higher tax bracket where you owe a higher percentage.
Right. It ensures that a raise that just covers inflation doesn't actually increase your tax burden. It keeps you neutral.
Exactly. But this budget freezes that indexation from 2027 to 2030.
So if inflation happens, which it always does, and I get a raise just to cover it, I might get pushed into a higher bracket and owe more percentage-wise.
Yes, you are effectively poorer because your money buys less, but you are taxed like you are richer.
Wow.
The government collects an estimated $500 million a year from this mechanism.
Wow.
And the beauty of it, from their perspective, is that they never have to hold a press conference announcing a tax hike. They just let inflation do the dirty work for them.
That is incredibly cynical. It's a tax hike on autopilot.
And it doesn't stop at income. They've also expanded the PST, the provincial sales tax. It now applies to professional services.
Professional services, like what? Give me some examples.
Accounting, architecture, engineering, and strata management.
Strata management, that's huge in BC. So if you live in a condo, your strata fees, which are already high, just got taxed.
Indirectly, yes. The cost of doing business for your strata manager goes up. They aren't going to eat that cost. They pass it down to the condo owners. It raises the cost of housing, the cost of running a small business. It ripples through the whole economy.
It seems so contradictory. They claim to want to improve affordability, but then they tax the very services that keep buildings standing and businesses running. But speaking of contradictions, we have to talk about the carbon tax.
The carbon tax shell game, as our source calls it.
This is a huge headline. Consumer carbon tax eliminated. On the surface, that sounds like relief. You know, hey, gas is cheaper.
It was framed as a populist move to help people's wallets. But when you peel back the layers, the math tells a very different story.
Walk us through the shell game. What's actually happening?
Here's the reality. The carbon tax, for all its faults, was progressive. The people who emitted the most paid the most.
Yeah.
And crucially, low-income families got rebates.
Right, the quarterly checks. I know people who relied on those for groceries.
The climate action tax credit, that was a $1 billion transfer to low-income households.
Sure.
That is now eliminated.
Gone.
Completely gone. Now, the government still needs money. So to make up for the lost revenue from scrapping the carbon tax, they are using these new income taxes and the PST expansion we just talked about.
So let me get this straight. They cut a tax on pollution and replaced it with a tax on income and services.
Correct. The source argues that the government killed a tax that made polluters pay and replaced it with taxes that make working families pay. If you're a low-income worker in a place like Langford, you lost your rebate check, and now you're paying higher income tax.
Meanwhile, the industrial polluters aren't facing that consumer carbon tax anymore. That's a complete reversal of the polluter pays principle. It's worker pays.
It is. And this leads us to the broader philosophy, or maybe lack thereof, in this budget. The finance minister, Minister Bailey, stated explicitly that this is not an austerity budget.
Not austerity? But we just talked about pausing hospitals, cutting student housing, and freezing tax brackets. That sounds an awful lot like austerity to me.
And here's the paradox. Section 5 of our deep dive is called the austerity paradox. If you look at the head count, 15,000 public sector jobs are being eliminated.
15,000 people. That's a small town.
It's significant. Plus, the $10 a day childcare program is frozen, no new spaces, and $1.4 billion has been cut from housing investments.
Okay, so if they're firing 15,000 people and cutting programs, how can they possibly claim it's not austerity? And where is the money going? Because surely they are saving a fortune.
This is the most fascinating and perhaps frustrating detail highlighted from the Globe and Mail. They're cutting 15,000 jobs to save about $625 million.
Okay.
But at the same time, the new public sector wage settlements raises for the people who remain are costing the government about $1.2 billion.
Wait, do the math for me again. They save $600 million by firing people, but spend $1.2 billion on raises.
Exactly. They're spending more money overall on wages, despite having fewer people.
So for the taxpayer, we're paying a higher total bill, but there are 15,000 fewer people to answer the phones, process permits, or run the services?
Yes. It is austerity in terms of service delivery. You get less. But it is not austerity in terms of spending. You pay more. It's the worst of both worlds.
That is baffling. It's like firing half your kitchen staff to save money, doubling the salary of the head chef, and then wondering why the food is coming out slow.
That's a very apt analogy. And speaking of slow delivery or non-delivery, we have to touch on the grocery rebate. This timeline is a masterclass in how to reverse a promise.
Well, the famous grocery rebate, I remember this so clearly. October 2024, the campaign promise. $1,000 in your pocket.
A tangible cash promise. Vote for us, get $1,000.
Then, January 2025, Premier EB signals it might be cut. February 2025, it's formally canceled.
And now, February 2026, instead of getting rebate, you get a tax hike.
It's incredible. In 16 months, the listener went from expecting a $1,000 check to facing higher income tax, higher property tax measures, and expanded sales tax all at once.
It really illustrates the pattern the analysts are identifying. It's not just a change in policy, it's a complete 180-degree turn. It erodes trust.
And all of this spending and taxing and cutting, surely it fixes the bottom line. Usually you endure this pain to get the budget back in the black. Is the budget saved?
Far from it. And this brings us to the final looming shadow, the debt spiral. The big picture is alarming. Total provincial debt is jumping from $154 billion to $235 billion over 3 years.
Nearly doubling the debt.
In 3 years.
It's a massive increase. But the problem isn't just the big number. It's the cost of carrying that debt. We call it debt servicing. The cost to pay the interest on this debt is rising from 4.9 cents per dollar of revenue to 8.2 cents.
So for every single dollar the government collects in taxes, almost 10% of it goes just to pay interest to the banks. Exactly. Next year, interest payments alone will cost $6.4 billion.
$6 billion, just interest. That is money that is literally doing nothing for us. Think of how many of those paused hospitals or schools you could build with $6 billion.
That's the crowding out effect. Every dollar spent on interest is a dollar taken away from healthcare or education. It's money that vanishes into the ether of financial markets instead of paving a road or treating a patient. RBC Economics warns that this is burning through BC's historic debt advantage. We used to be the fiscally prudent province. That reputation is evaporating.
It's scary to think about. We're paying more, getting less, and mortgaging the future all at the same time. It feels like we are in a trap.
And that leads us to the synthesis of all these sources. The pattern identified by the analysts is remarkably consistent. Step 1, make unaffordable election promises. Step 2, table optimistic projections that mask the real cost.
Right.
Step 3, cancel the promises immediately after the election. And step 4, raise taxes and cut capital projects later to try and plug the hole.
It's a cycle. And it leaves us with the big question that our source poses. When did they know?
That is the billion-dollar question. Did they know the 2025 numbers were fiction before the election? Was this a cynical ploy? Or was this a massive error in competence discovered only after the fact?
Neither option is very comforting. Either they misled us or they didn't know how to do the math.
And frankly, the budget we saw yesterday, Budget 2026, isn't described by our sources as a course correction. They call it a confession.
A confession, that's powerful.
It's an admission that the previous numbers were just wrong. And it leaves the listener with a provocative thought. If the projections can change by billions of dollars and entire tax regimes can flip in just 11 months, what value do the current projections hold for your future planning?
Right. If they say the deficit will go down next year, why should anyone believe them this time?
Exactly. Trust is the currency of government, and this budget seems to have spent a lot of it.
Well, on that cheerful note, I think we've given our listeners plenty to think about. I'd encourage you, listening right now, go check the status of that local infrastructure project you were counting on. The new hospital wing, the student housing. Dig into the details, because as we learned today, the headline doesn't always match the reality.
Always check the fine print.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll catch you on the next one.